I am Jenny with Right Word Express, and joining me today is Patrick Morgan. He's the fantastic author of 2 books so far. He debuted Apparent Horizon last fall, and just recently, yesterday as of this recording, Realms was released. Patrick, you want to tell us about that a bit?
Yeah, thanks Jenny so much for this opportunity and for letting me be here. It feels like I'm on a show, but for being here on your website, this is a great opportunity, like I said. But yeah, as of this recording, Realms just debuted yesterday. That was a lot of fun. Obviously, it's a book that I actually wrote several years ago, back in like 2016, 2017. Same thing with my first book, Apparent Horizon. But so it's been several years in the making for both of these books to get to this point. But it's nice to finally feel like I've caught up, if that makes sense, at this point now.
Yeah. So the question with that is, why wait? Why did you write them and then wait a few years before publishing?
For sure. So it definitely wasn't my intention. Obviously, a lot of times I feel like that's something a lot of people say in life, that kind of like, you want to zig and life zags or whatever, and you kind of have to adapt and be, sort of kind of adapt to those new situations and scenarios. I actually, with Apparent Horizon, my first book that just got published last fall, I wrote that, I want to say maybe 2015, 2014, and went through the whole rigmarole of like, sending out query letters to the small publishers and literary agents, did that whole thing, found a small publisher, signed the contract, did my due diligence, had, kind of went through that entire process. And then unfortunately that publisher, maybe a year out from the actual publication date, folded and returned all of our rights back to us, myself included, and all their other authors. And again, not to try and, cry over spilt milk. I'm happy to be in the situation that I'm in now. But of course, at the time, as like, someone who was trying to make their debut and, an aspiring author, I really kind of wished that, obviously I didn't wish that the publisher would ever go out of business, but if it had to happen, I kind of selfishly would have wished that it would have happened after my book had been published. So I just had that kind of like badge, of saying, well, at least I did my part and, got my work out there. But, at the time, like I said, I mean, the publication date had been set. I'd already started working on Realms. So I kind of, had signed a contract for a second book. I thought that everything was sort of, on track. And like I said, life kind of, throws you those lemons and you have to try and make lemonade, or whatever the expression is. So, ever since then, honestly, it's just been a process of kind of like trying to find the right publisher, continuing to write in my spare time. I also have work, obviously. So it's, unfortunately, I'm not quite at the point yet where I can subsist entirely off of my writing alone, hopefully soon. But yeah, what kind of brought me to finally being at this place today, where I was able to publish, my first book last fall and then my second book yesterday, was a good friend of mine from college. Actually, she published a book of her drawings with this publisher, with Phase Publishing. And, one day last summer, as a matter of fact, I just thought to myself, we're such good friends. Like, let me just ask her. Like, there's nothing that I can lose by just being like, hey, Connor, is there any chance that like you would feel comfortable making an introduction between me and your publisher and just seeing if it's a good fit on both sides? And she was like, absolutely, no problem. And so that kind of started the ball rolling. And, thankfully, the publishing company was interested. And then here we are today.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's a very long and frustrating process. I mean, that was 5 years ago, more, that you had started, and now we're here, and it must be validating to be like, yes, it finally happened.
It is. I mean, it's crazy, just even from a friends and family standpoint. I mean, I'm lucky to have a very supportive network of people in my life. That being said, I still feel like there's a difference, at least in my experience, between reaching out to, certain friends or relatives or acquaintances, coworkers, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years ago, with like a Microsoft Word document and being like, hey, I wrote a book, like, do you want to read this? And, of course, the people who are closest to you are like, that's awesome. Like, absolutely. But I think there are a lot of other people in your life who are kind of like, okay, cool. Like, nothing's necessarily going to come of that. But then once you do, kind of go through the steps and, you find someone who kind of believes in you and you get the actual sort of validation, like you said, of being published, I feel like then it suddenly becomes more real, not just for you as an author, but also for those people in your life. They're suddenly much more inclined to, purchase your book, obviously through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Just being able to physically hold it in their hands or put it on their Kindle or their Nook. I think it's just a much more gratifying experience for them. And then of course that sort of feeds back into you, where it's like, oh, wow, this is real,
Yeah, exactly. Your parents get to be like, my son, the published author,
Right. It is funny, timing wise, just because we're not super removed from the holidays. And I got not one, but two coffee mugs that are like, one of them's, look at me becoming an author. And then the other one basically is like, this is what a published author looks like. So, obviously great minds think alike. I also got a t-shirt from my aunt that said, careful or you'll end up in my next novel. So, just kind of all of that sort of fun stuff to lean into and kind of embrace and obviously be tongue in cheek about it,
Yeah.
But because it's so funny for me, at least, I mean, and I truly mean this, like, people are like, oh, how does it feel to be published? And it's like, it's kind of like when it's your birthday, it's like you don't wake up and suddenly you're, infinitely wiser and sort of more aware of the world or experienced or whatever it is. It's just kind of like, well, it's a cool day. It's certainly, worth celebrating and it's a nice checkpoint. But, it's not like your life is suddenly magically changed overnight, but it certainly does build credibility and continues to open up more doors as you sort of go along in your journey.
Yeah. And that's awesome and fantastic in every way. Would you tell us a little bit about you? Just if you want to.
Sure. Yeah, of course. I'm 32. I live here in Austin with my dog, Cider. I have a sister and brother-in-law who also live in the city. I have my parents are in San Antonio, family kind of spread out throughout the Midwest and Texas. I previously was in LA for 12 years. That's definitely a big influence in my books. Out of these two, one of them, the first one is set in LA, and I have another book that'll be coming out this summer that's also takes place in Los Angeles. So I went, actually, we were kind of talking about this earlier, as a matter of fact, too, that my background is as an actor, as a matter of fact, which has certainly influenced my life. And I would like to think my writing as well. All I have ever wanted to do with my entire life since I was a kid, since I can remember, is act and write. And to me, the sort of commonality between those two professions is storytelling. It's like whether you are physically embodying these characters and sort of, playing a part in a play or in a film or a TV show, or you're writing a book, you're writing a play, you're writing a screenplay. You're telling a story. And that's kind of always been my MO, at least. So went to school for theater, did the whole Hollywood thing, auditioning, and a lot of my friends are still out there doing it. And I have all the respect in the world for that profession. It's certainly very competitive. Obviously, writing is by no means a cakewalk either. It's also a very competitive industry. But for me personally, I think I know I'm very happy that I've kind of come full circle back to writing, which I discovered for me before acting. Just because I like being in control more. And I feel like as beautiful as acting is in terms of it being this collaborative process where, you've got, all these different actors and a director and, writers and whatever else, techies. I like that obviously there are a lot of components to writing, as as an editor, and obviously publishing and, publicists and marketing and agents, but still I do feel like at the end of the day, if I was in a play or if I was in a TV show, I would kind of have to wait for other people and other forces to sort of come together to be able to practice my craft. And I feel like for me personally with writing, if I'm not doing it, I have only one person to blame, and that's myself, because there's really no excuse for me not to sit down and kind of, keep at it. So it's a good fit for me.
Good. That's awesome. And I was going to say the storytelling of aspects of both. Do you think you'll ever get back into acting?
It's fine. I just laughed just because that is the question when people are like, wow, yeah, you came back from that, you think that that's in your future? Honestly, I mean, never say never, but I don't miss it, Jenny. Like there's no part of me that, wakes up in the mornings or, goes to bed at night and just, woe is me, or I wish that I would have stayed. Like I gave it 12 years out there of trying to do it. And I mean, obviously that's a long time. There are plenty of people who I respect and admire who, you know, give it much, much longer. And I'm sure there are certainly people out there who tell you that and tell me that, you know, I didn't give it enough time and that, you know, you got to kind of keep waiting for that mythical big break. But I really honestly have no regrets. And, you know, I do miss Los Angeles. I miss Southern California. I miss my friends. But I definitely don't miss acting. So I think it would be much more rewarding. I mean, there was a time even when I first started getting back into writing, where I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll write something that'll get adapted into a screenplay and then I can star in it myself. And that will be like my, you know, breaking into acting. And now, honestly, I think that would make me too nervous. I'm much more content to sort of be on this side of the screen, so to speak, even though I know now we're both, you know,
both on
we
the
have screens right now. Yeah, exactly. We're both doing the speaking stuff. You know, it's something I enjoy, but yeah, I'm much more content to kind of like, you know, create a story, and then it would be wonderful to see that kind of get taken off and have my friends who are in Los Angeles, you know, star in the film if that, you know, if I would ever be so lucky to reach that point.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you had that flexibility and felt what your passion was and was willing to play with it. You know, and like you said, life does that zig and zag thing, and you got to doing something that you really enjoyed, and that's
totally
amazing.
I'm very happy and very fortunate that, you know, I was able to pivot when I was, you know, moving to Texas, getting closer to family, you know, being able to find a steady income and a job that I enjoy that allows me to still have the time to be able to write and pursue this. I know that that's not something that grows on trees, you know, that obviously there are plenty of people who wish that they have more time and more energy, more money, more resources, more support around them, whatever it is. So I'm very, very fortunate to have had this opportunity.
Good. I just keep saying that's awesome and amazing and all those things, but it truly is.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it is. It is.
Feels good.
It does. It does. And again, you know, just to kind of reflect it back, I mean, it really is all about, you know, and it's a cliche and people are always like, oh, you know, I mean, even last night at my book release party for Realms with my family members, you know, I said something to them where I was just like, this is in the acknowledgements as well. You know, I couldn't have done it without them. And, you know, I dedicated the book to my parents. And, you know, I think one of my parents, my mom or my dad last night were like, we think you probably could have done this even without us. And it's like, I appreciate you guys saying that, but like, I really don't think that's true. And it's the same thing with, you know, with Phase Publishing and with you editing. And, you know, I mean, I now have a fortunate to have a publicist on board. There are a lot of factors, you know, even everything that I said before about writing versus acting and writing being a much more sort of like individual process. Right. That's not to take anything away from the fact that this still is very collaborative, because, you know, especially with these two books, you know, having written them years ago, I was able to do that by myself, but like, there's no way I would have been able to be in this position today, being able to share these two stories with a much wider audience and future stories without that collaboration and all of those people, you know, on that team.
Thank you. Tell us more about Realms. So you had your release party last night. Tell us about the book. What are readers looking forward to?
Yeah, so I mean, the tagline is a love without dimension. What I've been telling people who kind of ask about it is I've been saying it's a love story unlike any love story you've ever read or, you know, come across. And I know that sounds like, oh, okay, well, you know, we've come across, I mean, love is such a well-known concept, and obviously there's so many movies, there's so many books. I mean, you know, Beatles song, All You Need Is Love, you know, clearly this is like a very universal concept. But hopefully this is a fresh spin on it. You know, there's different sort of categories that my publisher filed it under in terms of paranormal romance, psychological thriller, psychological fiction. I don't want to give too much away, but there's an element of kind of maybe even some sci-fi with some interdimensional traveling. But sort of the basic concept of it is that there's a young man who wakes up in a hospital, and he's 17 years old, and he has no idea really what happened to him. Everybody around him tells him, oh, you were in this car crash, you were in a coma for the past 2 months. You know, this is your life. And he's obviously kind of quite, you know, trying to sort of get back in the swing of things physically, mentally, emotionally, and kind of reconnect with his parents, reconnect with his hometown, you know, kind of the trappings of his life. and nothing seems to sort of feel right. And then he goes to the site of where this car crash was, supposedly happened or did happen, hoping that something might trigger, his memories. And when he goes there, he discovers this young girl who's alone and also unconscious in the forest. And she wakes up and she calls him by a different name, and she insists that they need to go back, whatever that means. And, so then of course it's this kind of relationship between these two teenagers who, are supposedly these, 17-year-olds in North Carolina, one of whom just awoke from a coma and doesn't really understand what's happening to him. And this character, Kirsa, well, her name is Jessica, but she claims to be Kirsa, basically saying, hey, you and I are actually from a parallel universe, where we've grown old together. We, our grandparents, we have children, we have, grandchildren and everything. And somehow we've slipped across the realms of time and space and, parallel universes, and we don't belong here and we need to go back. So the book is essentially, that's kind of the twist on the love story thing. It's just, to me at least, I think it's an interesting concept of, when people talk about old souls and, kind of soulmates and that whole idea of, your soul's counterpoint in another, person. Yeah. This, concept of, two people who very well could have spent, years and years together and have established this whole life together, but kind of having to travel and make this amazing journey and suddenly kind of rekindling and rediscovering one another as teenagers in these different bodies in this different environment. And then ultimately the main character having to determine, is she crazy or, because like what I feel for her is real, and kind of like, is there, and I don't really have these attachments to this world, but, is that just scientifically because I am recovering from a coma and that's to be expected with my mind? Or is there a possibility that some of this stuff is true? And I just personally am fascinated by dreams and, states of consciousness. And, I just think that there's so much that I love science and I love study, and obviously I certainly do my research about this as much as a person can, but I think that's also my point, that there's only so far that all of that can take us, and only so much that we know in terms of, are there parallel universes? Are there alternate dimensions? And, where do we go when we sleep? Is it possible to make contact with another human being in our dreams, and you hear about all these crazy things and near-death experiences, and I think it really gets the imagination going. So hopefully that's also what my readers will experience when they read this book.
Sounds great. I know it made me think about some different things and things in different ways. And, I'd come and talk to someone, oh, I can't tell you about this project I'm working on, but it's really exciting and it's different from other stuff. And so it was really fun to work on. And so I'm sure your readers will enjoy it.
I appreciate that so much. Yeah. It's, like I said, hopefully it's a love story that people aren't kind of used to seeing or whatever, but I do think a lot of people enjoy love stories regardless. So
we all love love.
Exactly.
Good. Okay. You mentioned that you have another book coming out this summer. Mm-hmm. Would you give us a tiny little just tease on it?
Sure. Yeah. So I can tell you the title of the book is Viaticum. I can tell you when it's coming out. It's coming out on July 6th. We'll also be through the publisher, Phase Publishing. In terms of a tease, I guess I'll just say that it has to do with a young man in Los Angeles. Like I said, it takes place back in LA, who loses his job and gets approached by a stranger in a strange sort of circumstance and environment, and offered a position at this company. And he goes to work for this tech company, and there's some cultish vibes to this tech company, I guess I'll just say, in the sense of it's it's a cliche to say everything is maybe not as it may seem, but I think kind of early on, he goes in and it's, there's, I don't want to give too much away, like I said, but there's, it's this beautiful office space where, people are walking around barefoot, and there's, grass growing on the ground of this office building, and, plants and fountains, and they have, juice bars.
Paradise of an office.
Exactly. I mean, the tagline for this one is, paradise has a price. And so it's this character's journey of essentially kind of having this dream vocation suddenly open up to him. But as the more time he spends with both his coworkers, and particularly with this sort of messianic couple who are, you know, this tech power couple, you know, Hollywood celebrities, but also sort of geniuses, you start to wonder, is everything kind of, you know, on the up and up, or is there something else that's kind of happening? And then, you know, there's certainly some mysterious elements to it. And like I said, kind of some cult vibes to this company without trying to give too much away. So
sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is quite the tease. I'm excited to read it.
Yeah.
So now we are going to get into a little bit of a game. I have this lovely wooden box, and inside it, I have a bunch of slips of paper. I know the questions on here, but I don't know which one I'm going to draw.
Okay.
So we're just going to let fate decide what the audience wants to know about you today. So first one, and it says, what is the most amusing thing that has ever happened to you?
Oh man, that's a tough one right from the get-go.
Yeah.
What is the most amusing thing? I will say, this is just the first thing that comes to mind. I have been to Burning Man a couple of times, as a matter of fact. And, you know, for those who aren't familiar, everyone wants to, oh, is that a music festival? Oh, it's kind of it's a lot of different things. There's some survival elements to it. There's some art elements to it. There is a music element to it, you know, camping, being out in the desert. There's lots of layers to it, but I was fortunate to go to this a couple of times, obviously pre-COVID, and it's, you know, since been canceled. Hopefully we'll come back at some point in the future, and you know, I'll be in a position where I could, you know, go out for a week again out into the desert. And but in terms of amusing, you know, the very first time that I went, my friend from college had just always insisted. He was like, Patrick, you're going to love this. It's right up your alley. It's just super duper creative. It's like Dr. Seuss, but, you know, crazy during the day. There's all these fantastical things to see, and at night everything comes alive with lights and fire and, you know, all these art cars. And I remember the day after the man burned, you know, this major event, which was one of the best fireworks shows and kind of spectacles of my life that I've ever seen. We went out, the two of us, to sort of see the smoldering ruins of the man. And, you know, all of a sudden we kind of heard music, and we looked to our side, and there was a New Orleans, you know, style jazz funeral happening. Just like people, you know, and again, this isn't something that's like put on by the organizers of Burning Man. It's just people who, they were just like, this is what we want to do. We play these instruments. We love jazz music. We love like New Orleans culture. We're going to bring this to the middle of nowhere, Nevada. And so they were kind of playing, you know, I don't know, When the Saints Go Marching In or something, playing different songs. And then all of a sudden the ground started to vibrate beneath our feet, and we like turn around, and this giant pirate ship, you know, on wheels, just rolls over, and, you know, people are handing out pate. I've never had pate before in my life. I've never had it since, but of course, like, I had it for the first time, you know, got to eat that and try that, being served out of a pirate ship as this like New Orleans funeral, you know, is happening around these smoldering ashes out in the middle of the desert in Nevada. So this is not a plug for Burning Man. I'm not getting paid by them or anything, but I will just say, I mean, certainly from an amusing and sort of fantastical experience, as someone, again, kind of just, you know, piggybacking off everything we talked about, someone who has, you know, their entire background is in writing and creating worlds, and acting and playing make-believe. There are a few places, you know, I think of like Disneyland and like Burning Man as just being these meccas for make-believe is what I'll say.
Exactly. So. Make-believe can happen to you in real life.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Creativity of others, watching movies and reading books and writing your own stories even.
Right. Yeah. It's a very inspiring place. And yeah, so again, I don't know if that qualifies as amusing, but it was certainly, you know, amusing to me in the sense of just how nonsensical and otherworldly it was.
You're like, this is not normal life.
Yeah, exactly. It's very surreal. Yeah. Yes, it's one of those moments where you kind of have to say, you know, there's an old saying from improv, you know, improv artists and improv performers say yes and, where it's just like, no matter what somebody brings to, you know, the scene or whatever, you know, has no matter how out of left field it is, you just say, okay, I'm going to accept that, and now I'm going to run with it, you know. And I feel like that's definitely an amusing sort of part of life, and also that energy is very present at that place.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I totally count that as amusing. I was amused hearing it, so
okay, good.
We're good.
Nice.
Check mark.
Check mark.
All right, next one.
Okay.
Here we go. What was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your books?
Surprising things. You know what? Again, first thing that comes to mind, that I am more of a planner than I would have thought. I've always loved English. I loved my English teachers in high school. I don't know if they ever saw this, if they would appreciate me saying this, but you know, back in school, I'm sure we're all familiar with kind of, you know, having to do outlines for essays and, you know, kind of planning everything out and doing rough drafts and stuff. And I definitely back then was much more of a like, I wanted to just sort of fly by the seat of my pants and just kind of, I was like, you know, I can just write this, like, you know, just go right into it and it'll be good. And I feel like some of that energy I definitely carried into my first book too, in terms of Apparent Horizon, when I was kind of sitting down, because I was like, this was my first time I'd written, you know, short stories as a kid, and, you know, poetry and some plays even in high school. But, you know, I'd never written a full length novel before. So I think I was still kind of trying to feel my way through it, and, you know, and just sort of seeing like what that process would be like. But pretty early on doing it, I remember thinking to myself, I really want to like kind of like, I have ideas and kind of, again, checkpoints and sort of scenes, you know, to use sort of the acting vernacular, where I could kind of see them in my mind's eye and knew that I needed to like hit those points and sort of flush them out. But I realized pretty early on that I needed to actually sort of plot things out and create this outline. Yeah. And then since then, I feel like it's only grown. You know, with Realms, I was very sort of calculated in terms of, you know, before I even started putting any words to the page, I was like, all right, I'm going to plan this whole thing out from A to Z. And then same thing with Viaticum, and, you know, hopefully moving forward, that's kind of the process that, you know, sort of evolved for me. And the way I look at it, at least, and I know obviously every writer is different, every artist is different, but I like the idea of like sort of creating a skeleton and, you know, a blueprint, but then also you're going to give yourself room to kind of be surprised along that way, because that's also life, you know. I mean, obviously anyone who's taken a road trip or whatever can attest that, like, you know where you're going and you know maybe what your path is and sort of what those places where you're going to stop along the way. But, you know, sometimes I kind of, you know, piggybacking what we were talking about earlier with, you know, life giving you zig and zag and all that other stuff, it's, you know, there are those sort of surprises. So that to me has been a surprising part of just being a writer in general, is, you know, being someone who always felt very comfortable just sort of like letting go and seeing what happens. I actually have found that there's, you know, a greater sense of, it sounds almost like paradoxical, but there's almost a greater sense of like freedom in having a roadmap, you know, and having an outline, because it's like you sort of have that trust in yourself that, like, you know where you're going, so you can kind of explore, you know, in between those points, if that makes sense at all.
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm follow up on that. Do you think you're more of a plotter or a pantser, or somewhere right in the middle?
I definitely feel like I'm now more of a plotter. Like I said, my teenage self would definitely be a pantser. My mom used to always tell me, you know, you sooner or later, you know, you keep flying by the seat of your pants with these, you know, essays and school projects, and, you know, procrastinating, like it's going to catch up to you. As I'm sure many people can relate to that with their parents too. Yeah, exactly. It's just like, there's that, you know, there's that energy, and there's something to be said for working under pressure. Like, I mean, that's something that I really enjoy with my publisher is, you know, I told him for this calendar year, I was like, you know, it was our mutual goal to publish 3 books together in this calendar year of 2021. I was like, give me deadlines, you know, tell me exactly, like, let's set these release dates if it's possible. And then I'm going to work my way backwards from that and just kind of know where these points are. So yeah, to answer your question, just in general, whether it's actual planning of, you know, what I'm trying to do as a writer, or planning the actual books themselves, I'm definitely more now in planner mode. I mean, even last night at the book release party that my family was nice enough to host for me, the gift that my parents gave me was a new Moleskine notebook that I could use for my fourth book. So, and kind of start, you know, jotting stuff down. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. Let's do one more.
Cool.
And this kind of ties right in there. We're following along the same lines. Fate wants to know more about your planning. This one says, do your characters seem to hijack the story, or do you have a firm grip on the reins?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I think it, you know, at least thus far, there hasn't really been a case where I feel like I'm dramatically pulled off from sort of the general through line and the kind of the journey as it's going. That being said, if this makes any sense at all, I do feel like sometimes I am surprised that I'll be in one place, you know, at least in the story, you know, setting, and a character, it's almost, again, I'm going to use like an acting term, and kind of, I'm seeing it almost like a stage or like a set, you know, of a film or something, where somebody enters on that you maybe weren't expecting that they were going to come in when they did, you know. And I can think about those instances where it almost sort of does feel magical, or kind of like, you know, again, tying back into the whole realms and consciousness and subconscious, that it was almost sort of meant to be, you know, because I personally believe that it's a combination, you know. I think that you need both. I mean, this is something that's always stuck with me in my life is, and I don't know if it was a teacher or several teachers, or if it was a book that I read as a kid, but I remember, you know, kind of this idea or theory that, you know, all these great thinkers and inventors and, you know, philosophers, you have to put in this sort of conscientious work at solving whatever it is you're working on. Like, you have to put in the work in terms of, you know, again, just to use an example, like if you're a mathematician and you're just, you know, you're trying to work out what the solution is to that equation and that problem, and, you know, you're writing this stuff down on the marker board and all these different variables and everything, you need to do that. But you also need to know when to sort of step aside and then like go for a jog, or like take a shower, you know, or eat some food, or, you know, spend some time with friends, spend some time with family, you know, go to sleep. And that's sort of that cliche of when, you know, you wake up in the middle of the night and all of a sudden the answer has presented itself, you know? And obviously, you know, I think that's the combination of a lot of things. It's not like it just, you know, materialized out of nowhere. You did all that work sort of consciously to get there. But, you know, and I do think that if you hadn't done that, like, it wouldn't sort of spring to you as that eureka moment, and, you know, in the shower or while you're driving your kids to school or whatever it is. So I kind of feel like it's the same way with the characters, where I think you need, at least for me, you need to sort of have a general idea of where you're going and where your story's going, where your characters are going. But you also, again, this is just my personal opinion, obviously, but I feel like you also need to not be so stubborn and holding the reins so tight that, you know, when a happy accident occurs, you know, you're at least open to it and open to sort of adapting with that and seeing what that might, you know, teach you about your story and about the characters. Because I feel like more often than not, after the fact, you can't see it having gone any other way than the way it did. And that's where that sort of sense of like, oh, it was always meant to be comes in, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Just continuing with the acting metaphor, you know, just like a director saying to the actors, okay, improv this is what we're aiming for. And they do it and you're like, okay, I had no idea. That was great.
Yeah, totally. And there's so many examples in movies. I mean, and this is not to, obviously, I'm far be it from me to diminish writers, you know, as a writer myself, but there's so many instances throughout Hollywood history and a lot of famous films where, you know, those sort of classic lines weren't actually the screenwriters. They were the actors who were improvising. And, you know, and of course, but, you know, I don't personally think that they would have gotten those lines, or that those would have just came out of nowhere, so to speak, on the actor's part, unless they had that sort of support system of the director, like you're talking about, and their co-stars, and the writer who provided such great characterizations and plot and material for those moments to happen.
Right. They had that framework to work within and knew it well enough to just run with it. And as the author, you're doing the same thing with your characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you know, and I know everyone's process is different, of course. I'm sure some people just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And other people might say, you know, they're very, very precise, you know, they're like, it's going to stay through this. But to me, I feel like that happy medium sort of yes, you need to be a plotter, or at least I need to be a plotter, and kind of like create that world and sort of create that framework. But then, like you said, allowing the characters to sort of move freely within that. Because if you do a good enough job, I feel like in terms of your plotting and your outline and sort of creating that world and creating these characters, I think they're going to behave in such a way that like will go according to your plans, even if there are still some surprises. They're not going to lead you astray, if that makes any sense.
Right. They're not going to suddenly decide, no, I'm not in love with this person, and I'm just
right.
going to do this thing.
And then you have to throw the entire thing out the window. Exactly. You're like, well, I guess I'm writing a different book. Yeah, totally.
Burn your manuscript, or, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. If you ever have a manuscript not work because your character just flew out and decided not to work, take it to Burning Man and just be like, forget this.
It's one last acting anecdote for you or whatever. It's not a personal one. I want to say the playwright is Lanford Wilson. I don't know. It's been a long time since my theater days, so hopefully that's not completely off. But he has a play, whoever this playwright is, has a play called Burn This. And that wasn't the title originally. He had written this play, and he reached a point where he was just like, this is terrible. And on his typewriter or whatever wrote "Burn This" and just threw it in a trash can, like to be like burned. And I don't know if it was his wife or his agent or a friend or if it was him himself, I'm not sure. But somebody obviously recovered this and was like, oh, this is really good. And of course, then it became published and became a very, you know, good play. But that's just kind of what you were talking about. Suddenly reminded me of. Yeah,
no, that's awesome. That's perfect. And that happens all the time. We toss something out and then sometimes it comes back and it's like, okay, let's work with it.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up right there. Thank you, Patrick, so much for your time. This was so enjoyable. And I'm so excited for everyone who's watching this and what they're going to experience. So yeah, everyone who's watching, go out and check out Patrick's website, find his books online. I've got links on the website, so they're easier for you to find him. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. This was awesome. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome.